I have a role model. It's not a person, it's a thing. It's a thing that's continuously changing and always evolving. It constantly has its walls torn down and then rebuilds itself again and again and again. My role model is the uterus. Think about it. Nothing is more resilient than the uterus. I've had my period for 9 years now. That's 108 periods. That's 108 times my uterus has dutifully created walls, gathering all its nutrients to create the perfect environment for a baby to grow. And that's 108 times I've said, stuff you uterus, I don't need your services this month. At which point my uterus loses it, totally breaks down, and then we're both left leaking either blood or tears. But my uterus then does it all over again. Why? Why can it be bothered? Well, when you boil it down, the purpose of the menstrual cycle is for a uterus to be the best version of itself. It has a period every month so that it can shed the old good-for-nothing lining and create a more healthy, more helpful environment for a baby to grow in if the opportunity arises. I'm setting up this analogy for a pretty obvious reason, and not just because I work in the menstrual healthcare industry. I actually think we should all strive to be a little bit more like the uterus. I think that we should adopt some of its habits so that we can build up new habits and new ways of thinking and create the perfect environment for new ideas, new ways of thinking, and new change to grow on a personal and a societal level. I want to take you to a different organ and tell you about two large-scale neurocognitive networks that you have in your brain. These networks are bundles of nerves that exist to make decisions based on how you're relating to your external environment. These are called the default mode network and the central executive network. The mission of the default mode network is to prioritize your physical and your psychological health. So I picture my default mode network as a sluggish version of me, lying on the couch and eating Doritos, telling myself what your mind really needs right now is rest and what your body needs is salt and MSG. Think Homer Simpson. On the other hand, the central executive network, it wants to understand what your external environment is expecting of you and to act accordingly, even if it goes against the default mode network. So the central executive network looks like that fit, type A personality who's really competitive and, let's face it, kind of crushed by the weight of their own expectations. There's a network in between these two networks that, when faced with a decision, will choose whether you engage your default mode network or your central executive network. So let's head to an example. You're lying in your bed at 6 a.m. and the alarm goes off because for some inexplicable reason the night before you decided you'd be pumped for an early morning run. So you're lying in bed and you're faced with a decision. Do you give in to your default mode network, which is telling you, oh, it's so comfortable under these quilt covers, I'm so warm, and you really, really deserve a sleep in, you should definitely snooze that alarm? Or do you override that and enter your central executive network, which is saying, I know it hurts now, but soon the pain will be over and you'll be running and you'll feel energetic, and as soon as you know it, your habit will grow and you'll be ripped. So another scenario, you're walking down the sidewalk with a bunch of friends and someone accidentally steps on the back of your heel. In that moment, you hate whoever that person is and you're in extreme pain and you just want to yell at them and say, stuff you for stepping on my heel, that really hurt. That's your default mode network talking. But then your central executive network saves the day and says, wait a second, that was a mistake, they didn't mean to do that, and you should really not yell at them because it will just make the situation really, really awkward. It's just not worth it. So we've got this amazing balance between the two, and that's really, really important because we need the central executive network telling us to strive to reach goals and to forward think. But we also need our default mode network to tell us, wait a second, you need a break. Your mind and your body is really, really exhausted. The thing about these two networks is they're a lot like a muscle. The more you use a network, the stronger it gets and the more easily it fires. For example, you're lying in your bed, the alarm goes off, and if you get into a habit of snoozing that alarm, your default mode network gets stronger and stronger and fires more easily. So in the following days, it's going to be harder and harder to get out of that habit and enter that central executive network. In the same way, if you start to consciously say, no, I'm going to get up straight away and go for a run, and the more you do that, the stronger that central executive network becomes and the more easy it will become. And soon enough, getting up at 6 a.m. will feel as natural and as normal as ever. So can you see here that our brains are limitlessly changing based on how we use them, for better or for worse? So really, we have the ability to control that. You might be thinking, okay, what's the connection here between the uterus and the brain? Well, if the uterus doesn't go through that process of shedding that lining and then building it back up again at a regular cycle, it doesn't have the right environment to grow a baby. Likewise, if our brain doesn't have a constant and regular shedding of unhealthy habits and unhelpful ways of thinking, then we can't build up walls that create an environment for new ideas to flourish and new ways of thinking and new change. So I have an idea. It's called incorporating something called the mental cycle into our monthly calendars. The way we can do this is through incorporating a brain period every month into our calendars. So how do we do this? Well, inspired by the period, we want to shed any unhelpful and unhealthy ways of thinking, negative thought processes that we don't need anymore. We want to shed them every month so that we can make way for new, better, improved ways of thinking. So these unhealthy thought patterns might fall into our default mode network. For example, sleeping in, endlessly scrolling on Instagram, and not prioritizing those tasks which you should do, but you've always pushed aside, like visiting your sister. Or they might fall into the central executive network. For example, never being able to enjoy the present because you're always focused on your future goals. Or it could be not nourishing your body because you're constantly running on adrenaline. So how do we shed these things? Well, at the end of every month, we can make very simple notes about some things that we want to change in our brains. We can write one negative thing you've been subconsciously or repeatedly telling yourself. For example, I don't have the skills or experience to live up to the expectations of this new job. Or one unhelpful thing you did too much of. For example, snoozing your alarm. And one helpful thing you did too little of, like visiting your grandparents. Then we decide what we actually want to build up, the habits and the thought processes we want to make stronger. For example, one positive thing about yourself, one helpful habit you want to work on, and one skill you want to improve on, or a topic you want to learn more about. It's very well to just write these things down. It's important to put them in a place that you're constantly looking at so that every day you can be reminded of these very small but very significant ways you want to develop your brain in a really, really positive way. So I would love for you to join me and put in a 15-minute slot at the end of every calendar month so that we can have our collective brain period. We live in the four walls of our head, so it's about time that we take a leaf from the Uterus's book and make a habit of spring cleaning on a very regular basis. Thank you.